In a crowded square in Rome in 1842, a man holds up a sacred image of the Virgin Mary before hundreds of people. His hands tremble, not with reverence, but with hatred. With a sarcastic smile, he tears the image in half, shouting blasphemies that make the blood run cold in the veins of those present. The people flee in horror, but what this man did not know is that very night, she would come to him. Not with anger, not with punishment, but with a presence so sublime and silent that it would forever change the course of his life. This is the true story of Alfonso Ratisbon, a young Jewish banker who publicly mocked the mother of Jesus, and how a single moment of divine encounter transformed the greatest skeptic into one of the most fervent devotees in history. To understand the magnitude of this miracle, we need to know who Alfonso Ratisbon was before that moment that would divide his life into two completely distinct parts. Born in Strasbourg, France, in 1814, Alfonso Marie Ratisbon grew up in a prosperous Jewish family. His father, Auguste Ratisbon, was a respected banker, and the family enjoyed considerable social prestige in the French community. Alfonso was the youngest of 4 siblings, all raised with the best privileges money could buy: a refined education, travel throughout Europe, influential contacts, and, above all, a social position that opened all doors for them. From a young age, Alfonso demonstrated a sharp intelligence and a strong, almost overwhelming personality. He was known for his eloquence, his debating ability, and, unfortunately, for his tendency to question and ridicule anything he didn't believe in. By the age of 28, he had already established himself as a successful banker, following in his father's footsteps, but his passion lay in challenging the religious conventions of his time. Alfonso was not just a non-believer, he was a militant against faith. Specializing in philosophical debates, he devoted much of his free time to writing anti-religious pamphlets and participating in intellectual circles where religion was systematically deconstructed and ridiculed. To him, all religions were primitive superstitions, crutches for weak minds unable to face the reality of human existence without the need for supernatural consolations. What made his position even more complex was the fact that his older brother, Theodore, had converted to Christianity years earlier. This conversion had caused a painful family rift. Alfonso saw his brother's decision not only as a betrayal of family traditions, but also as a demonstration of intellectual and emotional weakness. The arguments between the two brothers were legendary in their intensity and bitterness. In January 1842, Alfonso decided to take a trip through Europe, ostensibly to expand his business, but in reality to escape the family pressures related to his brother's conversion and to find new circles where he could freely express his anti-religious convictions. Rome was merely a stop on his itinerary, chosen more for its historical and cultural importance than for any religious interest. In truth, Alfonso saw the Eternal City as the epicenter of everything he despised: superstition, manipulation of the masses, and institutional power based on illusions. It was during this trip that Alfonso stayed at the home of a family acquaintance, Gustave de Bussières, a devout Catholic who immediately recognized his guest's anti-religious convictions. Bussières, a man of great patience and wisdom, did not confront Alfonso directly, but began to sow seeds of doubt through seemingly casual conversations about philosophy, art, and history. If you're enjoying this extraordinary story, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories of miracles that changed lives. Alfonso, however, interpreted Bussières' kindness as an attempt at conversion, which only intensified his defensiveness and anti-religious outbursts. It was in this context of growing tension that the incident that would change everything occurred. On the morning of January 19, 1842, Alfonso had engaged in a particularly heated debate with some Catholic intellectuals in a Roman café. The debate had centered on the issue of miracles, with Alfonso vigorously defending the position that all supposed miracles were either collective illusions or deliberate manipulations by the Church to keep the people ignorant and submissive. Frustrated by what he perceived as the obstinacy of his interlocutors, Alfonso decided he needed a more dramatic public demonstration of his convictions. It was then that he conceived the idea he considered the coup de grace against religious superstition. Heading to a religious goods store near the Vatican, Alfonso purchased one of the most beautiful images of the Virgin Mary available, a reproduction of Raphael's famous Madonna della Seggiola. The image was of exceptional quality, with exquisite detail depicting Mary holding the Christ child, with the infant Saint John the Baptist at her side. Alfonso knew exactly what he planned to do with that image, and the anticipation of the scandal it would cause filled him with an almost childlike satisfaction. That afternoon, Alfonso positioned himself on the steps of the Church of Sant'Andrea del Frate, one of the most visited churches in Rome. He chose the spot strategically. It was a busy spot, where pilgrims, tourists, and local Romans constantly passed. Holding the image of the Virgin Mary in his hands, Alfonso began to address the crowd that quickly gathered around him. His voice, honed in countless debates, carried a natural authority that made people stop and listen, even though his message was deeply disturbing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you who kneel before pieces of paper and wood, who place your hopes in medieval superstitions, I ask you, where is the power of this image? Where is the protection of this woman dead for 2,000 years? The crowd began to murmur, some backing away uncomfortably, others approaching with morbid curiosity. Alfonso continued, his voice growing in intensity. "Do you believe this image has power? That it can protect you, bless you, intercede for you with a God who, if he existed, would surely have more important things to do than listen to your pathetic pleas?" It was at this moment that Alfonso raised the image above his head, so that everyone could see it clearly. The silence that followed was almost palpable, as if even the air had stopped moving. "Then I will demonstrate to you," Alfonso shouted, "the true nature of this superstition." And before the horrified eyes of hundreds of people, Alfonso tore the sacred image in half. The sound of the tearing paper echoed through the square like thunder. Some women screamed. Men crossed themselves compulsively. Children began to cry. The horror on the people's faces was so intense it seemed physical, tangible. But Alfonso wasn't finished. Throwing the pieces of the image to the ground, he deliberately trampled on them, shouting blasphemies too painful to repeat, words that attacked not only the Virgin Mary, but the entire structure of the Christian faith. "Where is she now?" Alfonso cried, pointing to the wreckage of the image. "Why don't you punish me? Why don't you strike me with lightning? Because she doesn't exist. Because all this is nothing but theater for weak minds." The crowd began to disperse quickly, some people literally fleeing, others backing away while reciting prayers aloud, as if trying to create a spiritual barrier between themselves and this man who seemed to have completely lost his mind. An elderly priest who had witnessed the entire scene approached Alfonso, not with anger, but with a deep sadness in his eyes. "My son," he said softly, "you don't know what you're doing." Alfonso laughed sarcastically. "I know exactly what I'm doing, Father. I'm freeing these people from their illusions. I'm showing them the truth, that you are charlatans and they are fools." The priest shook his head slowly and walked away, murmuring prayers. Alfonso remained there for a few more minutes, savoring his victory, feeling like a warrior who had won a momentous battle against ignorance. But as he walked back to Boussier's house, Alfonso began to feel something strange. It wasn't remorse, he was convinced he had done the right thing. It was something more subtle, an uneasiness he couldn't quite identify. It was as if a very particular silence had settled around him, a silence that seemed to carry weight and meaning. Alfonso arrived at Boussier's house late in the afternoon, still euphoric from the day's events. He expected to find his host flustered, or at least embarrassed, as news of his public act had surely already spread through the Roman Catholic community. To his surprise, Bussières received him with his usual courtesy, as if nothing had happened. During dinner, the conversation flowed normally, on neutral topics: politics, literature, the transformations taking place in Europe. Alfonso felt slightly disappointed by his host's lack of reaction. "You have nothing to say about today's events?" Alfonso finally asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Bussières smiled gently. "What would you like me to say, Alfonso? I expected at least a reprimand, perhaps a lecture on religious respect, or perhaps even a request to leave your house." "Why would you do that?" Bussières responded calmly. "You are my guest, and I respect you as a person, regardless of your convictions." This unexpected response made Alfonso even more uneasy. He had prepared himself for confrontation, for debate, for anything but this calm acceptance that seemed to penetrate his psychological defenses in a way no argument had. After dinner, Alfonso retired to his quarters, a comfortable room on the second floor of the house. It was a welcoming, tastefully decorated space, with a desk by the window overlooking a small interior garden, a reading chair, and a dark wooden four-poster bed. Alfonso tried to concentrate on a philosophy book he had brought with him, but the words seemed to dance before his eyes without forming any meaning. The uneasiness that had begun in the square continued to grow, like a discordant musical note resonating persistently in the depths of his consciousness. He decided to write in his journal, a practice he maintained regularly to record his reflections and travel experiences. But when he sat down at his desk and picked up his quill, he found he couldn't find the words to describe what he had felt during and after the afternoon's incident. As a man accustomed to intellectual precision, this inability to articulate his own feelings frustrated him deeply. Alfonso got up from his desk and began pacing his room, trying to organize his thoughts. It was almost midnight when Alfonso finally lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, his mind obsessively reliving the day's events. Every detail seemed etched in his memory with almost photographic clarity: the expressions of horror on people's faces, the sound of paper tearing, the profound sadness in the elderly priest's eyes. This story is just beginning, and what happens next defines rational explanation. Don't miss a single detail. Sign up now. It was then, around 2 in the morning, that Alfonso noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the room. The silence, which had been common until then, began to take on a different quality, denser, more charged with presence. Initially, Alfonso attributed this sensation to fatigue and the emotional stress of the day. But gradually, it became impossible to ignore that something extraordinary was happening. The temperature of the room seemed to have changed, becoming neither hotter nor colder, but taking on a different quality, as if the air itself had transformed into something more substantive, more alive. Alfonso sat up in bed, all his senses alert. There was no sound, but he was absolutely certain that he was not alone in the room. This certainty did not come from any specific sensory perception. It was deeper, more primal, like a knowledge that sprang directly from his innermost being. And then, she appeared. At first, Alfonso thought he was dreaming, or perhaps hallucinating due to emotional stress. But his senses were absolutely clear and awake. He could feel the texture of the sheets beneath his hands, could hear the distant ticking of the clock in the hallway, could see every shadow cast by the moonlight streaming through the window. And there, by the window, stood a female figure radiating a light that was not light, a presence that was simultaneously visual and much more than visual. The Blessed Virgin Mary was there, not as an ethereal or ghostly apparition, but as a real, substantial presence, more real than anything Alfonso had ever experienced in his life. She did not speak, did not gesture, did not move. She was simply there, and her mere presence communicated more than volumes of words could express. Alfonso could not move a muscle. Not from fear, but from a reverence so profound that it seemed to paralyze all but the most essential physical functions. His breathing continued, his heart continued beating, but everything else seemed suspended in a state of absolute contemplation. The first feeling that overcame Alfonso was shame. Not the social shame of having been caught in error, but a much deeper shame, the shame of recognizing, completely indisputably, that he had committed a mistake not only social or moral, but ontological, fundamental, related to the very nature of reality. But this shame was immediately followed by something even more extraordinary: forgiveness. It was not a forgiveness communicated through words or gestures, but a forgiveness that emanated from Maria's very presence, a forgiveness so complete and unconditional that it transformed shame into gratitude. Alfonso understood, without a single word being spoken, that he had spent his entire life fighting something that not only existed, but loved him with a love deeper and purer than anything he had imagined possible. Maria's figure did not exactly correspond to any of the artistic representations Alfonso knew, but it was simultaneously recognizable and unique. She appeared to be about 20 years old, with a face of indescribable beauty, but a beauty that completely transcended common physical standards. It was a beauty that came from within, radiating holiness, wisdom, and a maternal love that embraced all humanity. Her eyes were the most striking aspect of her presence. They were neither large nor small, nor of a particularly striking color, but they held within them a depth that seemed infinite. When Alfonso looked into those eyes, he felt as if he were seeing not only Mary, but through her, the entire history of humanity, all the suffering that had been redeemed, all the hope that had been confirmed, every promise that had been fulfilled. Mary's hands were clasped in prayer, and from her hands emanated a soft light that didn't illuminate the room in the physical sense, but seemed to illuminate Alfonso's soul from the inside out. It was as if he were seeing himself for the first time with absolute clarity, understanding not only his mistakes but also his potential for something infinitely greater. Mary's attire was simple, a blue cloak over a white dress, both seemingly made of a substance that was simultaneously fabric and light. There were no ornaments, jewelry, or any ostentation, but the simplicity radiated a majesty that made all earthly riches pale in comparison. As Alfonso contemplated this extraordinary presence, he began to understand things his intellectual education had never taught him. He realized that he had spent his life studying the shadows on the wall of Plato's cave, debating the nature of shadows, mocking those who claimed there was something beyond the shadows, when all along there was a luminous, living reality waiting to be recognized. He understood that his intelligence, of which he prided himself so much, was a tool that could lead him toward truth or lead him away from it, depending on how he wielded it. He had used his intelligence as a weapon against faith, when he should have used it as a bridge toward deeper understanding. He understood that his atheism was not, as he had thought, a superior intellectual position, but a form of spiritual pride that had blinded him to realities available to anyone willing to open their heart beyond the intellect. The encounter lasted, Alfonso could never pinpoint precisely, perhaps 15 minutes, perhaps an hour, perhaps an eternity. Time had lost its usual meaning, as if he had been transported to a dimension where clocks had no relevance. During this entire period, not a single word was spoken. The communication occurred on a level far deeper than verbal language, on a level where soul spoke directly to soul, where truths were conveyed not through intellectual concepts but through direct and immediate experience. Alfonso understood, without it being explained to him, that Maria was there not to punish him for his act of blasphemy, but to offer him something he hadn't even known he was seeking: the certainty that there existed a reality beyond what his physical senses could perceive, a reality where love was the fundamental law and where every human being had infinite value and an eternal purpose. He also understood that his intellectual quest, though it had taken a misguided path, had been motivated by a fundamentally correct impulse, the impulse to find the truth. The problem hadn't been his search for truth, but his presumption that he already knew where that truth could or couldn't be found. As he contemplated Maria, Alfonso began to perceive details that transcended ordinary visual perception. He could see, somehow, the history of humanity reflected in her presence. He could perceive the millions of prayers that had been addressed to her over the centuries. He could feel the maternal love she directed toward each individual human being. He could understand her role as a mediator between humanity and the divine. More than that, Alfonso began to perceive his own life from a completely new perspective. He saw how every event, every choice, every relationship had been part of a larger pattern he had never been able to see. He saw how even his mistakes and rebellions had served a purpose, preparing him for this moment of revelation. He also saw the suffering he had caused others through his anti-religious activism. Not just the obvious suffering of those he had publicly offended, but the more subtle suffering of those who had lost or had their faith weakened because of his influence. This recognition brought genuine pain, but a pain that was immediately transformed by the understanding that all this suffering could be redeemed through love and forgiveness. Gradually, Alfonso began to notice that Maria's presence was becoming less visible, not because she was leaving, but because he was beginning to internalize her. It was as if she were planting herself in his soul, like a seed of light that would continue to grow and develop for the rest of his life. The final moments of their encounter were the most intense. Alfonso felt such an overwhelming love flowing from Maria toward him that he thought his heart might literally burst with gratitude. It was a love that accepted him completely as he was, but also called him to become all that he could be. It was a love that healed wounds he didn't even know he had, that answered questions he didn't even know he was asking, that offered hope he didn't even know he needed. What happened that night transformed not just one man, but touched the lives of thousands. Stay with us to find out how this story continues, and don't forget to subscribe. And then, as silently as she had appeared, Maria disappeared. But Alfonso knew she hadn't truly left. She had become part of him in a way that would make it impossible to return to her former self. Alfonso remained motionless in bed until dawn, not sleeping, but in a state of deep contemplation that was more restorative than any sleep could be. As the first rays of sunlight began to stream through the window, he felt as if he were waking not just from one night, but from a lifetime of mistaken dreams. He got up slowly, walking to the window where Maria had appeared. The garden outside looked different, more alive, more meaningful. Every leaf, every flower seemed to carry a meaning he had never perceived before. It was as if he had acquired new eyes, capable of seeing not just the surfaces of things, but their deepest essences. Alfonso looked in the mirror and saw a man physically identical to the one he had been the day before, but fundamentally transformed. His eyes had a different quality, a depth and a peace that had not been there before. It was as if the light he had seen emanating from Maria had permanently settled in his soul, transforming him from the inside out. He dressed carefully and went downstairs to find Bussières, who was already having breakfast in the garden. The host looked up as Alfonso approached and immediately realized that something extraordinary had happened. "Good morning, Alfonso," Bussières said gently. "You seem different this morning." Alfonso sat across from his host, struggling to find adequate words to describe what he had experienced. "Gustave," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something that will seem impossible to believe." Bussières leaned forward, his eyes filled with interest and compassion. "I listen to you, Alfonso." And then, for the first time in his life, Alfonso spoke of a miracle not to deny it or explain it away, but to bear witness to it. He described every detail of the nocturnal encounter, every sensation, every insight he had received. He spoke about the transformation he felt within himself, about the absolute certainty he now had that there was a spiritual reality as real as the physical world, even more real. Bussières listened quietly, occasionally asking a clarifying question, but mostly allowing Alfonso to freely express his experience. When Alfonso finished, there were tears in his eyes, tears of gratitude and joy, but also tears of regret for the time lost, the opportunities squandered, the people hurt. "Alfonso," Bussières said softly, "what you described is exactly the kind of experience saints and mystics have recounted throughout the centuries. You have been blessed with extraordinary grace. But why me?" Alfonso asked. "Why someone like me, who disrespected her so publicly, who mocked everything she represents?" Bussières smiled. "Perhaps precisely because of that. Divine mercy often chooses the least likely to demonstrate that no one is beyond redemption. Your conversion will be a powerful witness to others who consider themselves too lost to be saved." Alfonso spent the rest of the morning walking the streets of Rome, seeing the city with completely new eyes. The churches that had previously seemed monuments to superstition now seemed like portals to the sacred. The pilgrims who had previously seemed foolish now seemed like courageous seekers of truth. The priests who had previously seemed charlatans now seemed like devoted servants of something infinitely greater than themselves. But it was when Alfonso approached the church of Sant'Andrea del Frat, where he had committed his act of blasphemy the day before, that the magnitude of his transformation became clear. Standing in the very spot where he had torn the sacred image, he was overcome by a wave of remorse so intense that he had to lean against the church wall to keep from falling. People passed by him, some recognizing him as the man who had caused the scandal the day before. But instead of avoiding or confronting him, many approached him with curiosity, realizing that something had radically changed in him. An elderly woman, who had been present during the previous day's incident, approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, sir," she said, "but aren't you the man who, yesterday?" "Yes, ma'am," Alfonso replied, his voice thick with humility. "It is I. And I have come here to publicly apologize for what I have done." The news that the man who had blasphemed the Virgin Mary the day before had returned to the scene of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered, many of the same people who had witnessed the act of desecration. Alfonso climbed the same steps where he had delivered his blasphemous speech, but this time his posture was completely different. Instead of the combative arrogance of the previous day, there was genuine humility, a vulnerability that touched the hearts of everyone present. "My friends," Alfonso began, his voice thick with emotion. "Yesterday I stood here as a blind man who thought he could see, as a fool who considered himself wise. I came to mock what you hold sacred. I came to attack the faith that sustains your lives." The crowd was utterly silent, some crossing themselves, others simply watching with growing admiration. "This morning, I wake up a different man. Not because someone convinced me through intellectual arguments, not because I read some revelatory book, but because I was visited by the very one I dishonored yesterday. Mary Most Holy came to me, not with punishment, not with rebuke, but with a love so pure and transforming that my soul had no choice but to acknowledge the truth I had denied my entire life." Alfonso paused, allowing his words to sink into the consciousness of his listeners. Many people were weeping openly, touched not only by his words but by the radiant sincerity that emanated from his entire being. "I cannot undo the evil I did yesterday," he continued. "I cannot erase the blasphemous words I uttered. I cannot completely repair the offense I committed against the Mother of our Lord. But I can offer my life as reparation. I can dedicate every day I have left on this earth to bearing witness to the reality of the divine love shown to me." A voice from the crowd cried out, "How do we know this isn't another trick? How do we know you're not mocking us again?" Alfonso turned toward the voice. "You are right to be suspicious, my friend. Yesterday, I was worthy only of suspicion. But I ask only this of you. Observe my life from today on. Judge me not by the words I speak now, in the heat of emotion, but by the actions I take in the coming months and years. If my conversion is genuine, it will manifest itself in lasting fruits." Another member of the crowd asked, "What do you intend to do now? How will you live from now on?" Alfonso took a deep breath. "First, I will find a priest to prepare me for baptism. I know this may seem hasty, but the certainty I carry within me does not allow for delay. Second, I will dedicate my life to the service of God and His Most Holy Mother. I do not yet know exactly how, but I trust that the path will be shown to me." A priest had approached the crowd during Alfonso's speech. It was Father Theodore de Bussiers, Gustave's brother and one of the most respected priests in Rome. He stepped forward and placed his hand on Alfonso's shoulder. "My son," he said softly but clearly enough for everyone to hear, "if your conversion is genuine, as it appears to be, then you will be welcome in the Catholic Church. But you must understand that the path of faith is not always easy. There will be moments of doubt, temptation, and difficulty. Are you prepared for this?" Alfonso looked the priest directly in the eye. "Father, yesterday I would have said I was prepared for anything because I thought I knew everything. Today, I know almost nothing, and that is precisely why I am prepared for everything. When you know nothing, you are truly ready to learn." In the days that followed, Alfonso began an intensive process of preparation for his baptism into the Catholic faith. Father Theodore de Bussiers personally undertook his catechetical instruction, impressed by the sincerity and depth of the changes he observed in the young convert. The religious instruction sessions revealed a fascinating aspect of Alfonso's transformation. His mind, previously trained to find flaws and inconsistencies in Christian doctrine, now applied itself with equal intensity to understanding and integrating the Church's teachings. His rigorous intellectual formation, which had previously been an obstacle to faith, became a powerful tool for his spiritual deepening. "It's extraordinary," Father Theodore confessed to his brother Gustave. "Alfonso asks questions that demonstrate not only intelligence, but a genuine thirst for spiritual understanding. It's as if he were hungry for truths that until recently he had denied existed." Alfonso devoured the sacred texts with the same passion with which he had previously studied atheist philosophers. He read the Gospels, the epistles of St. Paul, and the writings of the Church Fathers, always taking notes, always seeking deeper connections between the different aspects of Catholic doctrine. But his preparation was not merely intellectual. Alfonso spent hours in prayer, often in the same church of Sant'Andrea del Frat where he had committed his blasphemy. He was often seen kneeling before an image of the Virgin Mary, not only praying but also seemingly in intimate conversation with her. One morning, Father Theodore found Alfonso in the church before sunrise, completely prostrated on the floor before the altar of the Virgin, in a position of total adoration. When Alfonso finally rose, his face was bathed in tears. "She is here, Father," Alfonso whispered. "Not like that first night, not in a visible way, but her presence is as real as yours or mine. She guides me, instructs me, comforts me. It's like having a spiritual mother who never abandons me." During this period of preparation, Alfonso also began actively repairing the damage caused by his years of anti-religious activism. He wrote personal letters to everyone he could remember having negatively influenced their faith, asking for forgiveness and offering testimony of his conversion. One of these letters was sent to his brother Theodore in Strasbourg. Theodore's reply arrived 2 weeks later, and when Alfonso read it, he fell to his knees in gratitude. His older brother expressed indescribable joy at Alfonso's conversion and revealed that he had spent years praying specifically for the Virgin Mary to touch his younger brother's heart. "Dear Alfonso," the letter read, "your words fill me with a joy that transcends any earthly happiness. During all these years of separation and conflict, I never stopped believing that Our Lady would find a way to reach you. That she chose such a direct and powerful manifestation demonstrates the special love she has for your soul. The news of Alfonso's conversion had spread far beyond the confines of Rome. Catholic newspapers across Europe began publishing accounts of the miracle of Sant'Andrea del Frat, as the event came to be known. Some accounts were accurate, others exaggerated, but all contributed to making Alfonso a well-known figure in Catholic circles. This unexpected notoriety initially disturbed Alfonso, who preferred to process his transformation in private. But Father Theodore helped him understand that his public conversion required an equally public testimony. God rarely grants extraordinary graces solely for the benefit of individuals, the priest explained. Your experience is meant to be a beacon of hope for others who consider themselves far from divine mercy. You have a responsibility to share your story. This is how Alfonso began accepting invitations to speak at churches and seminars, always with humility, always emphasizing not his own importance, but the greatness of divine mercy that had transformed even someone like him. On January 31, 1842, exactly 12 days after his vision of the Virgin Mary, Alfonso Marie Ratisbonne was baptized into the Catholic faith in the Church of the Gesù in Rome. The ceremony was conducted by Cardinal Patrizzi, Vicar of Rome, due to the extraordinary nature of Alfonso's conversion. The church was filled with faithful who had followed Alfonso's story since the day of his public blasphemy. Many of those present were the same people who had witnessed both his act of disrespect and his subsequent public reparation. The atmosphere was one of celebration, but also of profound reverence before the mystery of divine grace. Alfonso had chosen to receive the baptismal name Marie Alphonse, formally incorporating his devotion to the Virgin Mary into his new Christian identity. During the ceremony, many people reported feeling a special presence, as if Mary herself were present to witness the official conversion of the one she had visited so extraordinarily. When the baptismal water touched his forehead, Alfonso felt an inner confirmation of the transformation that had begun on that extraordinary night. It was as if the last vestiges of his former life were being washed away, leaving only the new creature born of his encounter with the divine. After his baptism, Alfonso remained in Rome for several more weeks, completing his religious instruction and discerning his future. The question that most concerned him was how to use his talents and resources to better serve God and the Church. Father Theodore suggested that Alfonso consider the priesthood, noting that his exceptional intelligence and dramatic conversion experience could make him an extraordinarily effective priest. Alfonso spent many hours in prayer before the image of the Virgin Mary, seeking guidance on this possibility. During one of these prayer sessions, Alfonso received what he described as a clear and unequivocal inner inspiration. He should return to France, fully reconcile with his family, and then begin his studies for the priesthood. The journey back to Strasbourg was a journey of family healing. Alfonso found his elderly parents initially skeptical of the sincerity of his conversion, but gradually convinced by the evident transformation of his character. His brother Theodore welcomed him with tears of joy, seeing in Alfonso's conversion the answer to years of fervent prayer. During his stay at home, Alfonso spent much time repairing relationships that had been damaged by his years of anti-religious activism. He visited relatives, family friends, and business colleagues, asking forgiveness for his past offenses and offering testimony of his transformation. One of these visits was particularly meaningful. Alfonso sought out Rabbi Hirsch, the spiritual leader of the Strasbourg Jewish community and a man who had known Alfonso since childhood. The rabbi received him with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. "Alfonso," the rabbi said, "I heard of your conversion to Christianity. I must admit that this saddens me deeply. You were one of our most brilliant young people." Alfonso responded kindly, "Rabbi Hirsch, I understand your sadness, and I regret any pain my decision may cause the community. But I must be honest about my experience. I did not convert for intellectual or social reasons. I was visited by a divine presence that completely transformed my understanding of reality. I cannot deny what I saw and felt." The rabbi shook his head sadly. "And your family, Alfonso? And your ancestral traditions?" "I do not reject my Jewish heritage," Alfonso explained. "Indeed, I now understand that it was a preparation for my current faith. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the same God I now worship as the Father of Jesus Christ. My conversion is not a rejection of Judaism, but its fulfillment in my personal life. After 3 months in Strasbourg, Alfonso clearly felt that it was time to begin his studies for the priesthood. He enrolled at the Sainte Geneviève Seminary in Paris, one of the most prestigious institutions for priestly training in France. His arrival at the seminary generated considerable interest. The story of his dramatic conversion had spread throughout French ecclesiastical circles, and many seminarians and professors were curious to meet the man who had been visited by the Virgin Mary in such an extraordinary way. Alfonso initially felt uncomfortable with the attention, preferring to be treated like any other seminarian. But he gradually came to understand that his unique experience gave him special responsibilities and opportunities to witness to the transforming power of divine grace. His studies at the seminary revealed new aspects of Alfonso's intellectual talents. His previous training in philosophy and economics, combined with his personal experience of conversion, gave him a unique perspective on theological questions. He particularly excelled in apologetic, the rational defense of the Christian faith. Ratisbonne has a special gift for responding to the objections of skeptics, observed Father Dupanloup, his professor of dogmatic theology. He knows intimately the objections to faith because he himself has raised them for years. This gives him a special credibility when presenting Christian responses. During his time in seminary, Alfonso maintained an extensive correspondence with people across Europe who had heard of his conversion and were seeking spiritual guidance. Many were skeptics like he had been, struggling with doubts about the existence of God or the truthfulness of Christianity. Alfonso responded to each letter personally, always with patience and understanding, never condescending or superior. He intimately understood the intellectual and emotional struggles these people were facing because he had experienced the same conflicts. One of his most regular correspondents was a young intellectual from London named Catherine Whitmore, who had read about his conversion in an English Catholic newspaper. Catherine was the daughter of an Anglican family but had become agnostic after university studies in philosophy. The letters exchanged between Alfonso and Catherine over the course of 2 years provide a fascinating portrait of how Alfonso applied his personal experience to help others on their spiritual journeys. He never pressed or used authoritarian arguments, but shared his own journey and invited his correspondents to consider the possibility that their assumptions about reality might be incomplete. During his 2nd year in seminary, Alfonso received permission to make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. This trip was transformative in a different, yet equally profound, way than his experience with the Virgin Mary. Walking through the sites where Jesus had lived, taught, suffered, and risen gave Alfonso a visceral understanding of the historical reality of his faith. In Bethlehem, he spent hours in the Basilica of the Nativity, contemplating the mystery of the Incarnation. In Jerusalem, he walked the Via Dolorosa, meditating on the Passion of Christ. But it was in Nazareth that Alfonso had his most significant experience of the pilgrimage. Visiting the Basilica of the Annunciation, the site traditionally associated with the angel Gabriel's announcement to the Virgin Mary, Alfonso felt a profound connection with his own experience of divine visitation. Here, he wrote in his journal, Mary said yes to God's plan for her life, even without fully understanding all its implications. That night in Rome, I too said yes, and now I understand that this yes must be renewed daily. Conversion is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of surrender to the divine will. On June 14, 1848, 6 years after his conversion, Alfonso Marie Ratisbonne was ordained a priest in Strasbourg Cathedral. The ceremony was presided over by the Bishop of Strasbourg, Monseigneur Ress, who had closely followed Alfonso's spiritual journey since his return to France. Alfonso's ordination attracted considerable attention, not only because of his famous conversion, but also because of the reputation he had built during his seminary years as an exceptional Christian intellectual and insightful spiritual director. During the ceremony, as Alfonso prostrated himself before the altar during the Litany of the Saints, many in attendance reported feeling an atmosphere of particular holiness. His mother, who had lived to see this extraordinary day, wept tears of joy and wonder at how God had transformed her youngest son. After his ordination, Father Alfonso was assigned to work in Paris, where he specialized in the apostolate among intellectuals and skeptics. His approach was unique. Rather than directly attacking anti-religious positions, he shared his own journey from doubt to faith, allowing people to see that it was possible to be intellectually rigorous and spiritually committed simultaneously. Father Alfonso established a dialogue center in the Montparnasse area, known at the time as a haven for artists, writers, and bohemian intellectuals. Many of these individuals were skeptical or openly hostile to organized religion, but Alfonso's non-confrontational approach and his credibility as a former skeptic attracted people who would never have entered a regular church. Meetings at Alfonso's center had an atmosphere more akin to an intellectual salon than a traditional religious event. He encouraged difficult questions, frankly admitted when he didn't have immediate answers, and always treated sincere questions with respect and seriousness. This extraordinary testimony is transforming lives to this day. If you want more stories like this, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. One of the regular attendees of Alfonso's meetings was Paul Verlaine, the famous poet who would later become known for his religious conversion. In his memoirs, Verlaine wrote, "Father Alfonso had a special gift for showing that faith did not require the abandonment of reason, but its elevation to a higher level. He never made us feel stupid for our doubts, but helped us see that our deepest questions could find answers in Christ." During this period of active ministry, Alfonso also maintained an intense prayer life, particularly his devotion to the Virgin Mary. He established the habit of spending at least an hour daily in prayer before an image of Mary, often reporting to his closest confidants that he still felt her maternal presence guiding his ministry. In 1852, 10 years after his conversion, Alfonso received an invitation that would once again change the course of his life. The Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem requested that he come to the Holy Land to establish a school for Palestinian Christian children living in conditions of extreme poverty and educational neglect. Alfonso saw this invitation as an opportunity to serve more directly those most in need, combining his passion for education with his commitment to serving the poor. After much discernment and prayer, he accepted the invitation and began preparations to move permanently to Palestine. Before leaving, Alfonso made a final pilgrimage to the Church of Sant'Andrea del Frate in Rome, the place where his life had been transformed 2 decades earlier. Kneeling on the very spot where he had blasphemed the Virgin Mary, he offered a prayer of gratitude for all he had received and a petition for blessings for the new chapter of his ministry that was about to begin. "Most Holy Mary," he prayed, "you visited me when I was your enemy and transformed me into your son. Now, as I prepare to serve the children of the Holy Land, I ask that you continue to guide me and use me as an instrument of your maternal love." Alfonso arrived in Jerusalem in October 1852 and was immediately confronted with the magnitude of the challenges he would face. The situation of Christian children in Ottoman Palestine was desperate. Most lived in extreme poverty, without access to formal education, vulnerable to exploitation, and often losing their Christian identity due to social and economic pressure. Initially settling in a small monastery near the Holy Sepulchre, Alfonso spent his first months in the Holy Land visiting scattered Christian communities, assessing needs, and establishing relationships with local leaders. What he discovered deeply moved him: entire families living in subhuman conditions, children working from a very young age to help their families survive, young people abandoning the Christian faith because they saw no future within their religious community. But Alfonso also discovered something that inspired him immensely: a simple and profound faith among Palestinian Christians who remained faithful despite all the hardships. This faith constantly reminded him of the authenticity of religious experience, far removed from the intellectual complexities he had encountered in Europe. With resources provided partly by the Catholic Church and partly by private donations from his contacts in France, Alfonso established his first school in Jerusalem, in a modest building near the Damascus Gate. The school began with only 15 students, but word that free education was available quickly spread throughout the Christian community. Alfonso's educational method was revolutionary for the time and region. In addition to basic academic instruction, reading, writing, arithmetic, he incorporated practical vocational training, moral education based on Christian principles, and, most importantly, he sought to develop in each child a sense of personal dignity and future potential. "These children do not just need knowledge," Alfonso wrote to a benefactor in France. "They need hope. They need to see that they have a future, that their lives have value, that they are loved by God regardless of their poverty or social status." Alfonso's approach to the children revealed the depth of his own spiritual transformation. He treated each child as if they were a precious treasure, constantly remembering how the Virgin Mary had treated him on the night of his conversion, with unconditional love that saw not only who he was, but who he could become. Within 2 years, Alfonso's school had grown to over 100 students and had established a reputation for educational excellence that attracted not only Christian but also Muslim and Jewish families who recognized the quality of the education offered. This success, however, also attracted opposition from various sources. Local Ottoman authorities were wary of an educational institution run by a European who might be promoting Western influence. Some Muslim religious leaders objected to what they saw as disguised Christian proselytizing. Even some local Christians questioned Alfonso's modern methods. But Alfonso faced all opposition with the same serenity that had characterized his initial conversion. When criticized for accepting non-Christian students, he would respond, "Christ taught us to love everyone, especially children. How can I deny a child an education based on their religion?" When accused of promoting a Western political agenda, he responded by demonstrating the practical results of his work. Children who had learned useful trades, young people who became responsible leaders in their communities, entire families lifted from extreme poverty through their children's education. In 1856, Alfonso expanded his work by establishing a second school in Bethlehem, specifically focused on Christian girls, who faced even greater challenges than boys in accessing education. This school included not only academic instruction but also training in advanced domestic skills that would enable young women to contribute financially to their families. Throughout this period of intensive work, Alfonso maintained a deep spiritual life, particularly his devotion to the Virgin Mary. He established the habit of making a monthly pilgrimage to Nazareth, where he would spend an entire day in prayer and reflection at the Basilica of the Annunciation. It was during one of these pilgrimages, in March 1858, that Alfonso had what he described as his second significant mystical experience. While praying before the altar of the Annunciation, Alfonso again felt the distinctive presence of Mary, not visually as had occurred in Rome, but as a profound inner communication. The message Alfonso received was clear: his work in the Holy Land was only the beginning of a larger apostolate. He was called to establish a religious congregation dedicated specifically to serving the most abandoned and forgotten populations, beginning with the children of the Holy Land, but eventually expanding to wherever there was a need. Returning to Jerusalem after his experience in Nazareth, Alfonso immediately began working on developing a new religious congregation. He had understood during his prayer that the work he was doing needed a more permanent and broader structure than he could provide alone. The new congregation, which he decided to call the Sisters of Our Lady of Zion, would be specifically dedicated to the educational apostolate among abandoned children and the promotion of interreligious dialogue, particularly between Christians and Jews. The congregation's name reflected both its devotion to the Virgin Mary and its commitment to the Holy Land. Alfonso began recruiting candidates for the new congregation from among local Christian women who had been educated in his schools and who demonstrated both a religious vocation and a capacity for educational work. His first candidate was Miriam Boutros, a young Palestinian from an Orthodox Christian family who had converted to Catholicism after studying at his Jerusalem school. "Miriam has exactly the kind of heart this congregation needs," Alfonso wrote to the Latin Patriarch. "She intimately understands the needs of the local population because she herself grew up here, but she also has the educational background necessary to be an effective educator." The process of establishing the congregation was long and complex. Alfonso needed the approval not only of Catholic ecclesiastical authorities but also of Ottoman civil authorities. Even more challenging, he needed to develop a rule of religious life that would be suited to the specific conditions of the Holy Land. The rule Alfonso developed for the Sisters of Our Lady of Zion was innovative in several respects. In addition to the traditional vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, the sisters took a fourth special vow: to dedicate themselves to the service of the most abandoned children and to working for reconciliation between different religious traditions. "Our specific vocation," Alfonso wrote in the congregation's rule, "is to be bridges of understanding and love between communities that have been separated by centuries of conflict and misunderstanding. We do this through education, which is the most effective way to transform hearts and minds." In 1860, 8 years after his arrival in Palestine, Alfonso received official Vatican approval for his new congregation. The official founding ceremony took place at the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, attended by the Latin Patriarch and representatives of several Eastern Christian communities. During the ceremony, Alfonso delivered a speech summing up his spiritual journey since that transformative night in Rome 18 years earlier. When the Blessed Virgin visited me that night in Rome, I thought I was receiving a personal gift, a grace meant for me alone. Now I understand that that visit was the beginning of a mission that extends far beyond my individual person. Through this congregation, Mary's maternal love will continue to touch the lives of abandoned children and build bridges of peace between peoples of different faiths. As primeras sis ermis que fizeram sus votos na nova congregatio incluiam tres Palestinas locais, duas francesas que haviam vindo especificamente para se junta ao trabalho de Alfonso e uma italiana que havia sido missionaria outras partes do Império Otomano. Como fundação oficial de congregatio, o trabalho de Alfonso expandiu-se rapidamente. Novas escolas foram estabelecidas Nazar, Haifa e outras cidades com populações cristas significativas. Mais importante ainda, Alfonso começou a desenvolver programas de intercâmbio cultural que permitem a jovens de diferentes tradições religiosas estudarem juntos e desenvolverem amizades que transcendiam as divisões sectárias tradicionais. Os anos finais de vida de Alfonso foram marcados por uma serenidade profunda e uma sabedoria que atraía pessoas de toda a Europa e Oriente Médio. Sua reputado como educador, místico e construtor de pontes interreligiosos havia se espalhado muito além das fronteiras de Palestina. Em 1864, Alfonso recebeu a visita de seu irmão Theodore, agora também padre e trabalhando com comunidades judaicas na Franca. Os dois irmãos, que décadas antes haviam sido separados por diferenças religiosas aparentemente irreconciliáveis, passaram semanas caminhando juntos pelos locais sagrados de Terra Santa, refletindo sobre os caminhos misteriosos através dos que Deus havia trabalhado em suas vidas. Quando você se convertiu ao cristianismo, Alfonso disse a seu irmão enquanto caminhavam pela Via Dolorosa, eu pensei que você havia traído nossa família e nossa tradição. Agora compreendo que você estava respondendo a uma chamada divina. Assim como eu respondi a minha própria chamada anos mais tarde. Deus usa diferentes caminhos para diferentes pessoas, mas o destino final é sempre o mesmo, o amor. Durante esta visita, Theodore ficou profundamente impressionado com o trabalho que Alfonso havia realizado. Você não apenas construiu escolas, ele observou. Você construiu uma nova forma de viver a fé cristã, uma forma que honra tanto nossa herança judaica quanto nosso compromisso com Cristo. Em 1865, Alfonso começou a sofrer de problemas de saúde que gradualmente limitaram sua capacidade de trabalho físico intensivo. Mas ao invés de se retirar de vida ativa, ele usou este período para escrever suas memórias espirituais e para formar as lideranças de congregação que havia fundado. Suas memórias, intituladas Do Desespero à Esperança, uma jornada com Maria, tornarem-se clássico de literatura espiritual católica. No livro, Alfonso descrevia não apenas os eventos dramáticos de sua conversão, mas as lições espirituais mais profundas que havia aprendido ao longo de décadas de vida religiosa ativa. A conversão não é evento único, ele escreveu, mas processo diário de escolher a luz ao invés das trevas, o amor ao invés do medo, a fé ao invés de dúvida. Aquela noite em Roma foi apenas o início de uma jornada que continua hoje e continuará meu último respiro. Uma das secos mais poderosas do livro descrevia sua compreensão madura de por que havia sido escolhido para uma experiência tão extraordinária. Durante anos me perguntei por que Nossa Senhora escolheu aparecer a alguém como eu, que a havia ofendido tão publicamente. Agora compreendo que exatamente por isso ela veio. Sua misericórdia é demonstrada de forma mais poderosa quando alcança aqueles que parecem estar mais longe dela. Minha converso e uma mensagem de esperança para todos que se consideram perdidos demais para serem salvos. Alfonso Ratisbon Moro M. 6 de maio de 1884, aos 70 anos, MSUA Sala Simples no Convento dos Hermes de Nossa Senhora de Com Jerusalem. Suas últimas palavras, sussurradas para a irmã Miriam que o acompanhava, foram: Ela está aqui. Maria está aqui. Vem-me buscar. Na hora de sua morte, de acordo com múltiplas testemunhas, uma fragrância extraordinária de rosas encheu o quarto, embora não houvesse flores presentes. Este fenomeno místico, conhecido na tradição católica como odor de santidade, foi interpretado pelos presentes como sinal de aprovecho divina pela vida de Alfonso. O funeral de Alfonso Ratisbon foi evento extraordinário que demonstrou o impacto duradouro de sua vida e trabalho. Representantes de todas as principais tradições religiosas de Terra Santa estiveram presentes. Cristãos católicos, ortodoxos e protestantes, judeus ortodoxos e reformistas, muçulmanos sunitas e zaitas. O patriarca latino, pronunciando a homilia fúnebre, diz: Alfonso Ratisbon vivo a prova de que não existe coração tão endurecido que não possa ser tocado pela graça divina, não existe pessoa tão perdida que não possa ser encontrada pelo amor de Deus. But perhaps the most moving testimony came from Miriam Boutros, now Mother Miriam, Superior General of the Sisters of Our Lady of Zion. Father Alfonso taught us that miracles do not end when the mystical experience ends. They begin there. The true miracle of Father Alfonso's life was not the vision he received, but the fruits that vision bore. Thousands of educated children, hundreds of families lifted from poverty, countless souls touched by the love of God. Today, more than 140 years after that transformative night in Rome, the Congregation of the Sisters of Our Lady of Zion continues the work begun by Alfonso. With houses on every continent, the sisters maintain their original commitment to educating the neediest children and building bridges of understanding between different religious traditions. The Catholic Church began the process of canonization for Alfonso Ratisbon in 1934, officially recognizing the heroic virtues demonstrated in his life. Thousands of people around the world report receiving special graces through his intercession, particularly in situations involving religious conversions and family reconciliation. Most importantly, Alfonso's story continues to touch hearts and transform lives. In an age of growing secularism and religious skepticism, his testimony offers hope that no person is beyond the reach of divine love, that no heart is so hardened that it cannot be softened by grace. The Church of Sant'Andrea del Frate in Rome, where Alfonso received his extraordinary vision, has become a place of pilgrimage for people seeking their own experience of spiritual transformation. A plaque at the exact spot where he knelt on that memorable night reminds visitors that, here, on January 20, 1842, the Virgin Mary appeared to Alfonso Ratisbon and transformed an enemy into a son. But the true message of Alfonso's life transcends any specific miraculous event. His journey reminds us that genuine spiritual transformation is always possible, that divine love is stronger than any human resistance, that God's mercy can reach even those who seem most distant from it. As Alfonso wrote in his memoirs, I was a man who had declared war on heaven, and heaven responded by sending its queen to adopt me as a son. If this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. This is my final message. Never give up hope, never consider yourself too lost to be saved, never doubt that you are loved with a love that transcends all human understanding. A historia de Alfonso Marie Ratisbon permanis como, dos testimonios mais poderosos do século XIX sobre o poder transformador de graça divina. Uma época que muitas pessoas lutam com dúvidas sobre a existência de Deus ou sobre seu interesse ativo na vida humana. O relato de Alfonso oferece evidência convincente de que o divino não apenas existe, mas busca ativamente aqueles que parecem estar mais longe dele. Sua vida nos ensina que os momentos de maior resistência espiritual podem ser exatamente aqueles que estamos mais próximos de uma transformação revolucionária. Que nossa dureza de coração pode ser o prelúdio para amolecimento extraordinário. Que nossos autos de desafio mais dramaticos podem ser transformados em testemunhos de fé igualmente dramáticos. Mais de século e meio depois daquela noite extraordinária em Roma, a intercessão de Alfonso Ratisbon continua a ser invocada por pessoas ao redor do mundo que buscam sua própria experiência de converso e transformação. Sua festa é celebrada no dia 6 de maio, data de sua morte, mas para aqueles que conhecem sua história, cada dia oferece a possibilidade de experimentar o mesmo tipo de encontro transformador que muda para sempre o curso de sua vida. A última palavra deve ser de da ao próprio Alfonso, que em uma de suas cartas finais escreveu: Se minha vida serve para algum propósito, que seja este, demonstrar que não existe pessoa tal perdida que não possa ser encontrada, não existe coração tal duro que não possa ser amolecida, não existe alma tal escura que não possa ser iluminada pelo amor infinito de Nosso Senhor e de sua Santíssima Mãe. Que todos que ouviram minha história possam encontrar esperança para suas próprias jornadas espirituais. Esta extraordinária história de Alfonso Maria Ratisbon nos lembra que os milagres não são apenas eventos do passado, mas realidades vivas que continuam a transformar caracos e vidas até hoje. Se você foi tocado por este testemunho de fé, converso e amor divino, compartilhe com outros que possam precisar ouvir esta mensagem de esperança. Inscreva-se em nosso canal para mais histórias inspiradoras de santos, místicos e pessoas comuns que experimentaram o extraordinário amor de Deus. Ative o sininho das notificações para não perder nenhum novo relato destes testemunhos poderosos que continuam a ecoar através dos séculos. Que a intercessão de Alfonso Ratisbon abençoe sua própria jornada espiritual, e que Maria Santíssima, que o visitou naquela noite transformadora em Roma, continue a guiar e proteger todos nos em nosso caminho para casa.